That night, she thought she was just putting me to bed. But then she saw it. Something I couldn't hide, something that changed everything. What happened next shocked us both, and nothing was ever the same again. It was late, far later than I should have been awake. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that makes every small sound echo louder than it should. I had been out with friends, laughing too much, drinking too much, and when I stumbled back through the front door, I knew I wasn't fooling anyone. She was waiting for me. Not angry, not scolding, just standing there with that calm, steady expression that somehow made me feel even guiltier. She sighed and said, "Come on, let's get you to bed." Her voice was gentle, almost motherly, and that should have been the end of it. She guided me down the hallway, her hand on my arm, steadying me as I tried to keep my balance. Every brush of her touch made my heart race, though I couldn't explain why. When we finally reached my room, I collapsed onto the edge of the bed. She knelt to take off my shoes, shaking her head at me with a small smile, like I was still a child who needed looking after. But then, as she leaned closer, her eyes caught something. A look of realization flickered across her face, and I knew she had seen it. Something I couldn't hide, something I wasn't prepared for her to notice. That moment changed everything. Her eyes lingered longer than they should have. I tried to shift, to hide it, but it was too late. She had already seen. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged, as if the air itself knew what had just happened. She swallowed hard, her hands frozen for a moment, resting on the edge of the bed. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at her, but I could feel the weight of her gaze. Finally, she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself, "You're not a boy anymore." The words hit me harder than I expected. They weren't said with anger. They weren't even said with judgment. They carried something else, something dangerous. My heart pounded in my chest, and I forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. "Guess the drinks are making me sloppy," I muttered, though my voice was tight, uncertain. But she didn't laugh. She stayed there, still, her breathing uneven. I could tell she was fighting with herself, the same way I was. In that moment, the line between right and wrong blurred, and though neither of us spoke it out loud, we both knew we had just stepped into a place we couldn't come back from. She sat there longer than she should have, her hand hovering near me as if she wanted to pull away but couldn't. The room felt too small, the air too thick. My pulse raced with every second that passed in silence. When her eyes finally met mine, they weren't the same as before. There was hesitation, yes, but also a curiosity she couldn't hide. "I should go," she whispered, almost to herself, but she didn't move. Something in me snapped then. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the loneliness that had been building in both of us for far too long. "If you should go, then why are you still here?" I asked quietly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, she sat frozen, caught between what she knew was right and what she secretly wanted. I reached out, my hand brushing against hers. It was the smallest touch, but it made her flinch, not from fear, but from the electricity of it. We both knew this moment was dangerous. We both knew it shouldn't happen. And yet, neither of us stopped it. That night was already changing into something else, something neither of us could undo. Her hand trembled beneath mine, but she didn't pull away. That hesitation, that pause, was enough to set my heart racing. It wasn't rejection, and it wasn't resistance. It was something far more dangerous, uncertainty. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Maybe I do," I whispered back, leaning just a little closer. Her breath hitched, and for a second I thought she would stand, walk out, and pretend none of this had ever happened. But she didn't move. She stayed, caught in the same magnetic pull that had taken over me. The tension between us grew unbearable. Every second of silence, every glance, every nervous breath made the boundary blur until it was almost invisible. When her eyes softened, just for a moment, I knew she wasn't going to stop me. That was the moment everything shifted. A simple act of helping me to bed had become the start of something forbidden, something we could never admit, yet couldn't resist. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. She still hadn't moved, her hand resting so close to mine that all it took was the slightest shift for our fingers to touch. The spark of that contact was undeniable, small, yet enough to send a rush through both of us. She closed her eyes for a second, whispering, "This isn't right," but her voice was trembling, her words carrying no conviction. I leaned closer, my lips brushing the space just near her ear. "Then stop me," I said quietly. She didn't. Instead, she opened her eyes, meeting mine, and in that shared silence, everything we'd been holding back broke free. Her lips parted, but before any words could escape, I kissed her. It wasn't hesitant anymore. It was real, deep, dangerous. When she pulled back slightly, her face was a mixture of guilt and something far stronger, desire. "We can't," she breathed, shaking her head. But even as she said it, her hand clutched at mine, holding tighter instead of letting go. That was the moment I knew. What shocked us both wasn't just what happened, but how much we wanted it. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as if the universe itself was daring us to stop. Her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with mine, every second pulling us deeper into something we both knew could ruin us. She pressed her forehead against mine, whispering, "If we do this, there's no taking it back." Her voice trembled, torn between fear and longing. I searched her eyes, looking for hesitation, but what I saw instead was fire, buried for so long, now burning uncontrollably. "I don't care," I admitted, my voice raw. "I've already crossed the line in my head 1,000 times. Tonight it's real." Her lips met mine again, this time harder, desperate, as though the dam had burst and nothing could stop the flood. My hand slid around her waist, pulling her closer, and she let out a sound that shook me to my core, a mix of surrender and need. The shock wasn't that it was happening. The real shock was that neither of us wanted it to stop anymore. Her hands trembled as they moved along me, as if each touch was testing the limits of how far we were willing to go. I could feel her hesitation, but I could also feel the pull, stronger than both of us, stronger than reason, stronger than guilt. She whispered, almost as if trying to convince herself, "This isn't right, we can't." But her body betrayed her words, leaning into me, clinging to me as though letting go would shatter everything. I kissed her again, softer this time, and she melted into it. The warmth of her skin, the faint taste of wine still on her lips, it all blurred together until right and wrong became distant echoes, drowned out by the pounding in our chests. When she pulled back, her eyes glistened in the dim light. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said, but then, almost in the same breath, she whispered, "Don't stop." And in that moment, we both knew we had stepped beyond the point of return. The room felt smaller, the silence louder, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. She clutched at me, as if torn between pushing me away and pulling me closer. Her breathing was uneven, sharp, desperate, mirroring my own. I whispered her name, but it sounded foreign now, almost forbidden. She shook her head, eyes squeezed shut, and then she whispered back, "Don't say anything, just let me feel this." And so I did. Every second stretched into eternity, every movement binding us tighter to a secret neither of us was ready to face. The guilt lingered, yes, but so did something else, something dangerous, intoxicating. It was no longer just about comfort or closeness. It was about a hunger that had lived unspoken for too long. By the time it was over, we were left trembling in silence, avoiding each other's eyes, knowing we had crossed a line that could never be erased. That night didn't just shock us, it bound us in a way that would haunt us forever. The morning after felt like a storm had passed, but instead of clear skies, there was only heaviness. She avoided my eyes as she brought me breakfast, her hands shaking as though the tray itself carried the weight of our secret. We didn't speak of what happened. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. The way she moved around me carefully, the way I struggled to act normal, it was all proof that nothing could ever be the same again. She tried to slip back into her role, into the routine, but the tension clung to us like shadows that refused to leave. Every glance carried memory, every touch carried danger. And in the quiet of the night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear her whisper, "Don't stop." That single moment of weakness became a chain around both of us, something we could never undo, no matter how much we wished we could. And that's when it hit me. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers, or even lovers outside the home. Sometimes, it's born right in the places where you thought you were safest. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night never loosened its grip on me. Every time I heard her footsteps in the hallway, my heart pounded, torn between longing and shame. She avoided being alone with me, but when our eyes did meet, there was something there, something unspoken, undeniable. One evening, she lingered by my door. Her hand rested on the frame, and I could see the battle in her expression. She wanted to say something, to draw a line, but instead, she just whispered, "We have to forget it ever happened." But how could I? The touch, the warmth, the way her voice trembled, it was carved into me. Pretending it didn't exist felt impossible. The weight of silence between us became its own form of torture. It wasn't just about what we did, it was about what it meant. And in the quiet moments, I began to realize that secrets like ours don't stay buried forever. They resurface, one way or another, and when they do, they destroy everything in their path. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed. One night at dinner, her husband studied her longer than usual. His eyes moved between us, narrowing slightly, as though he could sense something had shifted. She kept her head down, nervously twisting her fork, and I felt the blood rush to my face. The tension was unbearable. Every small glance, every pause in conversation, felt like a spotlight on our secret. He asked simple questions, but his tone carried suspicion. "Everything all right with you too?" His words were casual, but his eyes were sharp. She forced a laugh, brushing it off, but I could see the panic in her movements. That was the moment I realized we weren't just fighting our guilt anymore. We were fighting time itself. Secrets like ours leave traces, subtle at first, but undeniable in the end. And I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be long before the truth tore its way to the surface. The night she came to put me to bed changed everything. What started as comfort turned into something we could never take back. We tried to bury it, to act as though life could return to normal, but it never did. The glances, the silence, the unspoken weight between us, it was always there, lingering. Her husband's suspicion grew, and though the truth never fully surfaced, the damage had already been done. Even without words, the distance between them widened, and I carried the guilt like a scar that wouldn't heal. In the end, we both learned the same painful lesson. Sometimes it isn't the act itself that destroys everything, but the secret that follows you, day after day, until it consumes you. That night shocked us both, and years later, I can still say with certainty, it was the moment that changed us forever.